Hi everybody, welcome to another process video, this time for muddy colors. And we're doing something near and dear to my heart, which is inking. I love some inking. And in this case, we're actually throwing it back to something I haven't used in a while, which is a Micron 005 pen. I love this pen. It's got a lot of tiny details, and that's what I need for this piece because there's a lot of little areas and I needed the thinnest line possible. So it was ideally suited. But before we could even get into the inking stage, I did what I usually do, which is a Alchemy abstract. So this is the free program Alchemy. Do a little breakdown, get some reference, do a nice comp, and then that is lightly transferred to the surface. My surface here is actually Fabriano Rosaspina Ivory paper. What a wonderful surface. First time I've drawn on it, and it just took the Pigma like a champ. It was pretty amazing. What I did with the pencil drawing first, though, is as the drawing was down, I wanted to ghost it out even more. So I took a kneaded eraser and I erased the lines substantially more so that you can see them there, but they're ghosted out considerably. Because it's really about finding the form. The drawing that you see there in the pencil is just what I call landmarking. It's making, the big shapes, the big areas, so I don't have to worry about things getting off center in my composition. And, I can really just find a lot of the flow, find a lot of the textures in the inking process as we're going through it. It's all about values, right? It's all about a contest. Like, look how the hand at the top of the screen there pops out because I went darker with the feather detail behind it. You got to find those sweet spots to push and pull the positive and negative space and to sometimes lose edges. I think possibly the master of this and the guy who taught me the most about this would be the wonderful Sergio Topi. Topi was fabulous, and he actually could fill spaces with value, and it turned out that it didn't even matter what he filled it with. Look at those shapes. Look at the mark making. It almost doesn't matter what it is, so long as it's the right value. Well, I'm taking that to heart sincerely as I dig into these wings here, especially behind the head and behind the main figure. You can imagine that if I had done all of the face or all of those arms that are already seen there as dark and as rendered as the wings, well, guess what? We wouldn't see them. It all turned into noise, right? So we need to be able to see these things, which is why we filled it in with much darker, much closer lines. But then on something like the hair, which is a blonde hairdo on the figure of the little girl, I used some stippling, just a little bit to just dot, and carry on some of those lines without as heavy a mark. It's a game, right? This is a tennis match. It's a back and forth, ping pong, ping pong. Okay, this is darker. Okay, this is lighter. Oh my God, in this face. The lightest touch I could possibly use on it is what I did. I was barely making a mark. I think people don't understand how pressure is so important when it comes to painting or drawing or inking or anything. You almost have to have that surgeon's touch where you can just lightly almost brush the surface with the ink, even with something like a Micron, getting the bare minimum of ink down that you need to for it. Inking the pie at the top. It's a fun little element in the piece, which is chock full of symbology, but I also did this right around Thanksgiving, so it was kind of fortuitous that I did some pie there. Doing the secondary head as well. The piece is actually pretty symbolic to me. This is about how, as kids, we have big dreams. We want to be astronauts. We want to be all these things. And then as life goes on, suddenly we get more serious. And those things we thought we could do, we don't think we can do anymore. So this is about that little kid inside of you who still has big dreams, wanting to break out of its shell. Again, filling in the feathers with forms. A lot of times my mark making tries to follow form, right? But other times it can just fill in, like we learned with Topi, and can just be interesting shapes or textures, or even just lightly activating areas is okay with the pen. And that looks like we're done with the inking stage. So now it's time to paint. For this, I got out my classic FW ink, but unlike most times, I watered it down so much, guys. I put so much water in this ink. I wanted to have that look of a stained etching, this whole piece. And the only color I wanted, the only bright color I wanted was this red. I thought about a cherry pie. I thought about a red dress. Then I got to bounce it around into red fingernails, red lips. You can see me moving it around. That's what you call like a color gradation. And here's the biggest bounce of it, which is on this red dress, right? You can see how wet it is. You can see how translucent it is. We can still see our lines through it. Even sponged it out a little bit. Gotta love the FW ink for such applications. And it's called a gradient theory because if you look, I got a big mass of the red at the bottom of the piece in the dress. Now, as you travel up the piece, there are little spots of red, but they get tinier and tinier as you travel. So it's a way of balancing out your art. Same thing happened with the texture. If you look at all the texture that I put behind the figure, well, as you get down to the bottom of that dress, I dropped out a lot of that texture. I didn't need it anymore. Now we're using the FW white ink, which went down fabulous on the Fabriano Ivory paper, which is kind of a nice little middle value. And I'm using a dip pen now. So this is a Nico dip pen, dipped into FW ink, and just going to town, finding those higher values that I wanted to hit. If you could almost think of this as ball gradients of value texture, if that makes any sense to you, that's sort of what I'm thinking about. Like even that white I'm putting behind the figure now. Think of that if I popped a gradient in Photoshop behind the figure. Why? So it would cut out not only the wings and the shape, but also the arms. Really quickly there, I was using a metal scraper. I use that quite a bit. It's a metal sculpting scraper, and I use it to mask off areas. Filling in the shell of the split figure. This was probably the most difficult part of the piece because I didn't know value-wise how far I wanted to go with it. Really just tried to take a guess at it, run away from it, and maybe we'll revisit it in a second, which of course we will. This is gold metallic FW ink done in a simple line with the dip pen. It has a great sheen to it. I do recommend this as a gold paint, and it's acrylic, so that's great too. It'll hang around, won't hurt your image. It worked out really well. And I just drew that off with a ruler off camera, which didn't take very long. It's pretty much just radiating out from a central point. Now we're going back into the shell again, and I keep saying shell because I didn't want this to be disgusting. I didn't want to actually look like human anatomy inside that figure. I wanted it to read, well, much more like something you're going to see in a moment, which is a peanut shell. There we go, hollowed out peanut shell. I dug around and I could only find half peanut shells, but I even tried to light it with a little backlighting to see how it might fill in. And using the bend in the back of the neck to kind of go up in value just to get some of that form in there. I could have filled in that head with hatchwork, right? I could have, but my fear was that it would be what we talked about a second ago, which was too busy, too much texture back there. So I thought it would be smarter to fill it in with a flat, which kind of ties it, or with a gradient, which kind of ties it to the dress. You can also see that I stained the inside of the wings just a little bit using that same kind of dirty sepia black FW ink. Going over the dress with more red, bouncing that around a little bit. Then I went ahead and gradated in some of the line work. Now, what I did was I put down clear water first. It's a classic watercolor resist technique where I put down clear water and then I worked the pigment in from the other direction, and as it touched the water, it gradated in just a beautiful way. This paper, again, fantastic. I hadn't stretched it, I hadn't taped it down, and it all finished up rather flat. And there it is, folks, the finish of Turn Down.